Hello, my name is Tashawn Jones, and welcome to my channel. This is my first video where I'm going to be talking about one of the passengers and crew that was on board the Titanic. So I apologize in advance for any of the editing mistakes or sound mistakes that you might have. By no means am I a YouTuber. I'm just a nerd with a camera that wants to talk about the Titanic. Uh, for my first passenger that I'm going to talk about, because I'm going to pick one each week, I'm going to do Edith Rosenbaum. And the reason that I picked her is because I jokingly refer to her as the Karen of the Titanic, just because of how much resistance she put into getting into a lifeboat on a sinking ship. So let's dig into her story. Edith Rosenbaum was born on June 12th, 1879, which would have meant she was 33 at the time that she boarded the ship. And this woman was born to a wealthy Jewish family, which would explain why, come later on, her name would later be changed. I'll go into details about that a little further into the story. And one thing that you absolutely, positively have to know about Edith Rosenbaum is that this woman had a passion for fashion. She absolute was a fashionista, which is a big thing for 1912. Because remember, in these days, women change clothes anywhere from 3 to 10 times a day. I read 10, and one of the things I've seen, I don't think that makes a lot of sense, but at least 3 times a day, a lot of women were changing clothes because this was the Edwardian era. And so she was actually a journalist for a fashion magazine. And the whole reason that she was in France was because she was getting some of these columns down and she wanted to go to one of the races to get one last story before heading over to America. So as she was boarding the Titanic, she brought along some high-end gowns that she was taking to some of her clients in America. And all of these clothes were put into 19 trunks. And she boarded in Cherbourg, France. So she would have taken the tender Nomadic and got on board there with the beautiful sunset. We've seen Ken Marshall's paintings and the scene that they did in Titanic and how beautiful of an evening that was. But as she was getting on board, she was debating on whether or not she should insure these 19 trunks that she have. Because this is top end fashion. This is like the Louis Pradagucci of that day. So she's trying to make sure she's taking good care of it. And one of the crew members told her that it didn't make sense to insure all of these things on this unsinkable ship. So she didn't. Instead, she got a cabin for them so that she could keep all of her trunks in these cabins. And that way she could, keep an eye on it or keep tabs on it. And she herself ended up boarding on cabin A11. That's where she stayed. And throughout the journey, she actually found it to be quite stiff of an environment. She felt like it was a little bit too high, high end people, maybe snooty people. But she definitely wrote in a letter that she thought the environment on the ship was stiff. Fast forward to the night of April the 14th, she is in the writing room and she's deciding she's going to send off a few letters, write a few letters, send off a few things. And at 11:30, which is lights out for White Star, that meant that it was time to go to bed. Most of the public spaces are kind of unofficially closed off. They don't want people lingering there, and especially on a Sunday, because remember, it's the Lord's Day, and this is a very much religious era in history. So she sends off her things. She decides she's going to return to her cabin and call it a night. And then, right as she's about to unlock her cabin door, she felt a bump. She gets in, she feels another bump, and then there's a third bump, and this one is powerful enough where it actually causes her to fall onto her bed. And so she decides, well, what are these bumps? I want to go look at it. So she looks out of her porthole and she sees this grayish, whitish mass going by. And she decides that she wants to go investigate. And so she goes out on deck and sees this giant thing in which one of the other passengers explained to her, this is an iceberg. As the iceberg was hitting the ship, some of the ice fell onto the deck. Now, Edith Rosenbaum herself said that her and some of the passengers picked up this ice and started playing snowballs. Now, I always found this kind of interesting because I would think that ice that falls off an iceberg would be pretty hard and would hurt if you get hit with it. It's not like fluffy like snow. But nonetheless, those are her exact words that they played snowballs with the ice. So after they had their fun with it, she returned to her cabin because she was told everything would be all right. And then later, she was informed that she should get up on deck and that they might be putting people into the boats. Now, she's a fashionista. So remember, and whenever she would do any of her interviews, you have to watch them. She always goes into great detail about what she was wearing. And when she got dressed to disembark the Titanic, she knew exactly what she was wearing. And I actually wrote it down. She said that she put on a woolen sheath dress, which was a hobble skirt, which, in my opinion, is the worst thing you could be wearing on a sinking ship. A hobble skirt is a skirt that greatly restricted the movement that women would have had. You couldn't run in them. Edith Rosenbaum herself described it as a potato sack. She said that I couldn't have been dressed more idiotic. Um, and she also had, with this hobble skirt, a wool cap, a couple of foxes. One was white, one was brown. And she said she had the thinnest fur coat that she owned. And like I said she couldn't have looked more ridiculous. And she had silk stockings and no underwear. Yes, this interview is probably 50 years later, and she still remembers even not having the underwear on. Which, to be fair, in those times, women's undergarments would have been a lot of time to put on. So she kept up with everything that she was wearing. Now, remember, an important thing to keep in mind is that not only does Edith Rosenbaum have to worry about herself, she has these 19 trunks that she's dealing with. So she went and made sure that she locked all the windows, all the doors, and all 19 of those trunks, each with their own key. And when she proceeded to go to the waiting area where they all were gathering up to see where they were going to go as far as lifeboat assignments, she saw her steward and she mentioned to him, "Hey, I have these 19 trunks. I heard that the ship is damaged and y'all might be towing her away and we might board another vessel. Can you do me a favor, and when you get to customs, can you send my trunks to New York?" Her steward, Wareham, told her, "You can kiss those trunks goodbye." And that's when she asked him, "Do you think it's serious?" And he said, "Well, I have 5 kids and I don't have a good feeling about it." So then that's when she said, "Well, hey, I have this little toy pig in my room. Can you please go fetch that for me?" And he did, and he brought it back to her. And she said that she got a few weird and ugly looks for that. So a lot of you might be wondering, why is she sending him back for a pig? Not her jewels, not her money. She in fact said that she went by the purser's office and didn't even think to grab her own belongings. Why this pig? Why was it so important? Well, a year earlier she was in a car accident and the driver died and she survived. And her mother got her this pig because it's a symbol of good luck. And she told her, "Keep this on you at all times." And it was a little toy musical pig where when you wind the tail, it would play the machich. I think I'm saying that right. Don't string me up. I'm Southern. I got a lisp. It's hard for me to say some words, but I'm thinking it was machich. Machich. Let me know in the comments. Um, and so it would play this tune, which was a very popular tune at the time. Now, as far as me mentioning earlier that she was like the Karen of the ship, it's because throughout the night, she was told by multiple men, multiple times, "Women and children to the boats. You need to get into the lifeboats." And she herself said that she thought it was perfectly asinine that in the middle of the night, in the middle of the Atlantic, they have to get into these little wooden boats when they're on this big, warm, unsinkable ship. So she just kept not listening and walking away and sitting down in a lounge or sitting different places where it was warm and there was heat. And eventually, Bruce Ismay himself saw her, picked her up, and said, "Women and children to the boats." And he put her into, she said, right in front of a iron ladder or walkway where it was leading down to where people were getting on the boats. Maybe that might be A deck. I'm not sure because they did load some people into the boats in A deck. Um, but nonetheless, he puts her there and she had these slippers on that had these fake diamonds on them. And one of them fell off, and she was looking for them. So she was crawling around on the deck looking for these diamonds that she thought looked so cute on her shoes. Once again, fashionista Karen not paying any attention to how serious the situation is getting. And finally, one of the men said, "You need to get into the boat." And she looks at him and says, "Do you see what I'm wearing? Like, I can't jump into no boat wearing this." And a sailor was walking by, and she had the pig wrapped around in like a little blanket under her arm. And he said, "Well, if you're not going to save yourself, we're going to save the baby." He took the pig out of her arm, threw it into the boat, and with that, she looked at the man and said, "Well, that's that. I'm going after that pig." So they picked her up, and the two men had to kind of toss her into the boat. And once she got in, she saw that the leg and the nose of the pig had been broken. But if you winded the tail, it still played music. And that actually came in handy because after the sinking and while they were floating out in the ocean, she actually was playing the instrument or the music box, and the kids were listening to it. Lifeboat 11 is the one she was in. And she said that all night she kept playing that music box to entertain the kids, and that one of them even was squealing like a pig himself. And years later, at a convention where Titanic survivors were meeting, she said that a big, tall, strapping man that was like a grandfather came up to her and said, "I was one of those kids in the boat where you were playing the little toy pig for us." And she has a picture of herself that I showed earlier in the video where it was taken on the Carpathia after she had been rescued. And she went on to do many interviews. She was one of the consultants for A Night to Remember. During World War One, she did some work with American Red Cross, and during World War Two, when things were starting to get a little rough in France, that's when she changed her last name from Rosenbaum to Russell. So you might see her name pop up as Edith Russell or Edith Rosenbaum. It's not because she was married; it's because she changed her name due to a lot of the hatred that was going around at that time of Jewish people. And in her old age, she became a little bit of a difficult woman. Some of the people that worked at the place that she stayed said that she was, I forgot what the words were. It wasn't an old hag, but like an old Edie or something. They just said that she was a pretty mean spirited woman, set in her ways, did, kind of the way that a lot of people can get in their much older years because she died in 75 at the age of 95. And that's the story of Edith Russell. I find her to be a very fascinating woman. Some of her interviews and things I've seen, I find a little bit like, okay, I think you're exaggerating a little bit or a little bit over dramatic. But I mean, I like that. I like someone that's a little bit flamboyant and extra and extravagant. And so that's why come she's always been one of the survivors that definitely stuck out with me in the story. Um, so that's her story. Come back next week and we will talk about one of Titanic's second class passengers and what happened with them. Y'all have a good night.